In 1988, Elder M. Russell Ballard said, "Addiction surrenders later freedom to choose. Through chemical means, one can literally become disconnected from his or her own will." He said this 26 years ago. In our day, we have all been touched by addiction. If we have not experienced addiction directly, we have certainly seen the effects in the lives of those we love. I speak particularly to those who may at first thought believe they have not been bound by any particular addiction. I hope to extend this concept of disconnected will beyond our current understanding of addiction and apply it to all forms of bondage. In our most recent General Conference, Elder Quentin L. Cook said, "God intended that men and women would be free to make choices between good and evil. People can become enslaved or put themselves in bondage not only to harmful addictive substances, but also to harmful addictive philosophies that detract from righteous living. Bondage, subjugation, addictions, and servitude come in many forms." Close quote. When we think about bondage, we often think of sin, and certainly sin will enslave us. But I would like to expand our thoughts about bondage, as Elder Cook suggests, consider the forms of bondage we may experience personally. What makes bondage so unbearable is that it makes us feel powerless. It limits our choices. We have all felt the hopelessness that can come when we feel bound or powerless to change something in our lives that we wish were different. For this discussion, we will define bondage as anything that makes us feel powerless. Bondage can come in one of two ways, either by our own choices or just as likely by the effects of the choices of those around us. Things we have absolutely no say in. As I share a list of examples, I invite you to consider the forms that bondage takes in your life and think of how this may apply. As we've said, addiction to drugs, alcohol, immorality, pornography, gambling, but also addictions to things not so inherently evil. Things like video gaming, other forms of media, Pinterest, shopping, eating, sports, the list could go on. Sin, weakness, lack of skill or education, busyness, obligations, political ideology, depression, difficult or dysfunctional relationships, our upbringing, finances in the form of poverty, debt, or unemployment, illness, aging, loss or grief, and even our attitudes can enslave us. Attitudes like complacency or victimhood. Any of these, and perhaps others you have just now considered on your own, can render us powerless. By this definition, we can see how everyone is at one time or another, for varying reasons, in bondage. And because of this, we can see how today's discussion will apply to each of us personally. So what are the typical solutions to feeling bound in our lives? We can deny, we can surrender, or we can get help. John 8:32 teaches, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Freedom is the opposite of bondage. We must know, live, and tell the truth to be free. So we can clearly see that denial is no way to deliverance. We can surrender. We can surrender and give up and let hopelessness abound. This is the most devastating reaction to bondage, for it is here that the adversary can convince us that what we do does not matter. When we admit that we cannot do anything to deliver ourselves or our loved ones, we can sometimes argue that none of our decisions make any difference, not one way or another. I cannot pay my debts, so what difference does it make if I accrue more? Or I will never overcome this addiction, but at least it numbs my pain. This powerless state is the worst kind of bondage because it is disguised as freedom. It is false freedom to do whatever we want. It is insidious and destructive. So we can get help. This requires a different kind of work and effort than we think. It is not a matter of picking ourselves up by our bootstraps and simply deciding to no longer be powerless in our lives. We must come to understand that deliverance is far more a matter of the Lord's efforts than our own. It is only by the redeeming power of the Savior Jesus Christ that we can regain true freedom. This is not to say that we will always be delivered from the circumstances of our bondage, but from the helplessness. So what is the best solution? Clearly, to get help. The ARP, or Addiction Recovery Program Manual, developed and made available through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, offers instruction for how to make the atonement of Jesus Christ a reality in our lives each day. This is the solution for deliverance. This is help. This program can benefit anyone. The first 3 steps in the 12-step program have been summed up as, I can't. He can. I will let him. This is the starting point of deliverance. Everyone needs to know that we must rely on the Savior. Everyone needs to recognize that we cannot make it on our own. Romans 6:18. Being then made free from sin, ye become the servants of righteousness. This kind of servitude, in contrast to the types of bondage we have been discussing, brings freedom and empowerment here on earth and throughout the eternities. To be empowered is to live by the Spirit, to feel His love, and to be influenced by it. This is not a one-time experience, not something I achieve, but something I engage in each and every day. The ARP manual helps me to know how. We can discover for ourselves what we are taught in the ARP manual by those who live with addiction and have overcome. You can accept with serenity the current reality of your condition when you trust in God's ability to help you. You can accept with serenity that although you cannot control the choices and actions of others, you can decide how you will act in each situation you face. You can decide with courage to trust your Father in heaven and act according to His will. You can turn your will and life over to His care. You can decide to do what He asks and keep His commandments. You may not be able to change some things in your life, but you can change your willingness to trust God and to obey Him." Close quote. You have the choice to deny, surrender, or get help. Seeking help from those who have been bound and are now delivered, those who have prepared this user-friendly, easily accessible, life-changing resource is a wise choice. Wherefore, redemption cometh in and through the Holy Messiah, for He is full of grace and truth. 2 Nephi 2:6. I have known that truth. I have felt His love. I have been delivered and redeemed. I have been empowered. I testify of Him, and I witness of His power to save. I urge you to recognize your need for the deliverance that our Savior has to offer, and to go and discover for yourself how the ARP manual can help you to access this saving power. You can most easily access the manual through lds.org under Resources and search Addiction Recovery Program Manual. I conclude with a quote from Elder Cook. We must always remember that we do not save ourselves. We are liberated by the grace, love, and atoning sacrifice of the Savior. If we are true to His light, follow His commandments, and rely on His merits, we will avoid spiritual, physical, and intellectual bondage, for He is mighty to save.